Thank you, Tilmann, for this wonderful presentation. Thank you to everyone for being here and for inviting me to this AnthroMob seminar. Thank you also, Tilmann and Sonia, for organizing everything today. In this presentation, I would like to share with you an ethnographic project on Filipino domestic workers in Hong Kong and beyond. There are several key terms to understand this presentation. The first one is Filipino domestic workers. The presentation focused on female-led migration from the Philippines to other countries for domestic work, illuminating the global racialized labor regimes. Second, ethnography. The research is grounded in ethnographic work, conducted both on-site and online. It incorporates classic ethnography methods like intensive participant observation and interviews, but also creative approaches from multimodal ethnography. Third, visuality. This presentation is conceived as a visual journey. It relies primarily on a graphic article that I have around here if you want to have a look later, maybe. Oh. I have only one copy because the other is missing. It relies on this graphic article, but also on selected images from an ongoing graphic monograph, as well as materials from several art-based participatory workshops. Finally, cosmopolitanism, following Tilmann's advice that this presentation will be followed by many of the students of the syllabus Culture, Migration, and Mobility course. I don't know how many of you are from this course. Okay, quite a few. I will try to engage with critical concepts of cosmopolitanism. I thought is not a key concept in my work normally. Before focusing on Hong Kong itself, it's importantly to briefly situate the broader migration context from which Filipino domestic workers depart. As you can see on the screen, there is a long-standing conditions of structural vulnerability in the Philippines, including chronic poverty, unemployment, corruption, environmental disasters, and also the moral and economic pressure placed on women to provide for families. Labor migration is presented as the ideal and the solution. As you can see on the right, there are a lot of advertisements on the street and on social media, and also a lot of success stories circulate by word of mouth and through social media. As I say, migrating is the ideal and the solution for all problems. Also, the powerful national narrative of the overseas Filipino worker as a modern hero actively shape the aspirations and expectations long before departure, creating an horizon of hope that also coexists with fear, uncertainty, and vulnerability. As well as very common downward occupational mobility. As you can see on the right down corner, nurses become caregivers very often, teachers and engineers become maids. For many Filipino, Hong Kong is not the beginning of the migration journey. Neither is imagined as a linear or single journey. As Angie Marie Paul, a scholar specialized on Filipino stepwise migration states, stepwise migration, when undertaken by labor migrants, involves individual migration journeys based on short-term, multi-year overseas contracts in a series of countries organized according to a socially and personally constructed destination hierarchy. My fieldwork suggests that the current hierarchy of destination is this one you can see on the right. At the lowest level are countries where it's relatively easy to obtain a job and where there is no need to advance a placement fee. There is no need to pay in advance to go to another country for work. The migration expenses are deducted from the first salary, so basically it's cheaper to go. You don't need to advance money, and no experience is required, like the most countries in the Gulf countries and also Southeast Asia, especially Malaysia. In the middle top tier is Hong Kong, and Hong Kong is widely appreciated. Is everything okay? Because it has a kind of regulatory framework that offers a certain degree of protection to domestic workers, granting them like very basic labor rights that is not present in other countries. Salaries are higher than in many other destinations and is very close to the Philippines, which is very convenient to them when they have to travel. Once workers reach this stage in Hong Kong and they are able to accumulate savings and also experience, they might apply to other destinations perceived as higher in the hierarchy, such as Eastern Europe, Japan, or South Korea. And at the top of the aspirational hierarchy are Western Europe, the United States, Canada, and Australia, which are associated with greater stability, but overall with bigger salary and a stronger legal protection, but also the most difficult to reach, with very expensive fees and very difficult migration procedures. As I will show you today, working and living conditions in Hong Kong are difficult, very difficult in fact, but they are still far better than in most of the countries in the Gulf region and in Southeast Asia. In my conversations and interviews about previous migration experience with domestic workers in Hong Kong, many Filipino women repeatedly describe a situation of labor exploitation, sexual harassment, abuse. Well, the drawings you are seeing in the screen are just a few examples of real stories. In the top, you can see an attempted to murder, verbal abuse, sexual abuse, or here in the low corner, like a girl who was kidnapped in a room for several weeks. Also, some other girls who I talked with were locked for several days. This is something relatively common, I might say, not happening to everyone, but not so isolated. And you can hear many, very terrible stories. In fact, the fact is that these women demand protection and demand jobs in their country, in their own country, without having to migrate, yet their country and their political leaders keep pushing them into journeys of sacrifice and extreme vulnerability. It's in this context that we need to understand how they perceive and experience Hong Kong and why they want to go there. In the screen, you can see the mental emotional maps of Hong Kong created by 30 domestic workers in 3 art-based participatory workshops I organized in 2024. On them, it's easy to identify repeated elements referring to both physical and symbolic spaces, such as, for example, churches or children's future. But overall, it's interesting that more than half of the maps contain a reference to planes or third countries. Their presence is interesting itself as a map of Hong Kong do not necessarily need to incorporate an element to something outside Hong Kong, like a third country. But those references were frequent, and there were 2 kinds of reference. The first, to short-term mobility, related to visit to other countries, either because they travel with their employers or they wish to travel in the future to visit their relatives abroad, and to long-term mobility for those hoping to migrate to other countries after Hong Kong, which is posited as a step to a better life. As a whole, this creates a sort of aspirational maps as a visual metaphor of the key role of mobility, both physical and social in this context, which is intimately embedded in the idea and experience of Hong Kong itself. So now I can focus in Hong Kong. And to do so, I will present some drawings on my graphic article, which is somewhere over there. Entitled The Other City, a graphic article on Filipino domestic workers, power discontinuities, and immaterial genetic dwelling in Hong Kong. It is composed by 28 graphic pages and 2 written annexes, which are a glossary of concepts, and a methodological section. So basically we can start out with Hong Kong. The first figure is introduced by a sentence: once upon a time, a story repeated a million of times over. A woman, often a mother, migrating to take care of unknown others. As you might know already, in the early 2000s, Ali Holtzil pioneering work on the global care chains opened up a new approach to research on nexus of care, migration, and globalization. And it highlights how the growing inequalities that results from the commodification of care at the global scale basically affect women disproportionately. Most paradigmatic examples introduced by Hodgkiss or Pareñas focus on mothers from very poor countries such as Philippines who have to migrate to rich countries to take care of other wealthy families' children, while physically co-present care to their own children is delegated to extended family members such as grandmothers, or subcontracted to other local women with a lower status who are basically at the end of the chain. Xiang and Linkist define migration infrastructure as the systematically interlinked technologies, institutions, and actors that facilitate and condition mobility. And they identify 5 entangled dimensions: commercial, regulatory, technological, humanitarian, and social. The first 2 are key in the Philippines-Hong Kong migration context. The regulatory dimension includes, among others, the 2-year contract as the only mechanism to obtain work and residence permit in Hong Kong for foreign domestic workers. It drives to a permanent temporariness that conditions their lives, as they have no right to obtain a long residence permit or nationality, regardless of the number of years they have legally lived in Hong Kong. I have met people, women who has lived in Hong Kong for 20, 30, even 35 years, and the only thing they can do is renew the contract every 2 years, with the uncertainty of where else when I get old. The commercial dimension has the recruitment agencies as key agents, and the words you can see on the screen: hot sale, discount on Filipino and Indonesian maids, after sales follow-up. These are real words taken from agency websites, agency located in Hong Kong. And you can imagine how they are treated more as a commodity than as a human. And this can give you an idea of how they are positioned as the other in Hong Kong society upon arrival. Oh, sorry. Yeah. Obviously, language is not never neutral but powered, and the word maid is broadly used by recruitment agencies and employers, and this is not casual. It's often used also in official documents, although in the standard contract they use the word helper or domestic helper. However, beyond language, foreign domestic workers' routines are shaped by heavy burdens and overall heavy responsibilities. Particularly, they perform an essential care role to children and elderly in Hong Kong society, which basically enables the social reproduction. The powers asymmetries stem from the language or the symbolical to the physical. By law, they are forced to live in with their employers. They cannot live outside home. This collapses the boundaries between work and rest, public and private, but this is even worse if you consider the housing problem of Hong Kong, which has extreme shortage of housing and very small flats. As a result, most domestic workers do not have a bedroom or a proper private space in the house, and often they become a kind of foldable maid to store away at night. The body itself becomes a unit of measurement, and basically, if it fits, is enough. As you can see on the screen, the samples of accommodation you can see on the screen are also real. The word coffin is often mentioned when talking about their rooms. That's very often are these kind of cabinets in the upper part of the kitchen or in the corridor, like really a coffin, like only the body can fit in there. Other options include sleeping on a foldable mattress in storage rooms, living rooms, bathrooms, kitchens, sharing a room with children or an elderly, and in most extreme cases, like this one in the top right corner, in the down right corner, sorry, this kind of kennel-like structure or tent in the balcony or terrace. This is real. Essentially at night, these women are stored away. And in fact, the material reality is that sleeping or resting bodies, in other words, non-productive bodies, occupy space, which is something precious in Hong Kong. And of course, the other must not be trusted. And CCTV cameras are present on almost all these houses everywhere, sometimes even in their rooms they share with the children. The only space which is always free of cameras is the bathroom, and that's it. Very often they have to go to the bathroom if they want to make an urgent call to the family or wherever. So they are under permanent surveillance everywhere. But what about the public space? Because this is private space at home, but what about the public space? From Monday to Sunday, they are almost invisible in the city, and they step out in public space exclusively to carry out domestic or care-related tasks, like going to the market, accompanying children to school, these kind of things. I'm sorry. This changed radically on Sundays when most foreign domestic workers in Hong Kong have the year off. It's a ritual. Thousands of Filipino domestic workers and also from other nationalities go out to gather across Hong Kong public spaces. The scale is very large, leading to an intensive occupation of public space across the city. Thousands of women going everywhere with suitcases, bags, and foldable shopping trolleys, and then all the squares, sidewalks, parks, walkways, tunnels, and all kind of spaces you can imagine become full covered by tents, open umbrellas, and cardboard boxes, often with this kind of walls they made. And as you can see on the screen on this right, once again, in this sort of vernacular architecture they built, once again, the body itself becomes a unit of measurement. And these private spaces in the public space serve as a rack for picnicking, napping, singing karaoke, dancing, praying, health and beauty routines, among many other activities. And many of them also connected either symbolically or technologically to Philippines and other third countries where their relatives live. In this way, transnational domestic territories emerge all across the city. It's very common in this kind of private spaces in the public space to have a place to rest. Often they bring their own pillows. Another thing that is very common is to have like a rag or something in the floor, so leaving the shoes outside. And also Filipino food, either homemade or bought, and always like streaming on live for Facebook or for family members who are calling, but the phone is always omnipresent in these domestic spaces. Public space is transformed, and where usually circulate as a space of transit becomes a space of dwelling, modifying the physical, economic, social, and cultural landscape of the city, and generating striking contrasts, particularly in the central district of Hong Kong, which is like the most expensive. And as you can see on the top left, cars and luxury shopping are replaced by women picnicking, chatting, dancing, etc. Also in the right, business people become replaced by domestic workers, and luxury stores are surrounded by informal enclaves like the one on the corner there. The volumes, contours, and tempos of the city change, and basically foreign domestic workers are visible. Borders appear together, not primarily to protest, but also to assist, to rest, and to sustain life collectively. Appearance here is not only political in a conventional sense, but deeply corporeal. Drawing in the concept of a space of appearance, Arendt, Judith Butler proposes rethinking contemporary public demonstrations by focusing on the bodily dimensions of action, exploring bodies' possibilities and needs, and how they relate to power, and particularly when they are together in a same space, when they appear in the public space. And this is especially for these minorities who are often not qualified or not eligible to appear in the public space, such as in the case of the foreign domestic workers in Hong Kong. As such, Butler understands the right to appear as a body demand for a more livable set of lives in the context of power asymmetries. Butler's focus on the body and the conditions that shape and enable the space and the right to appear speak to how foreign domestic workers inhabit the public space. Their body's needs, like sleeping, eating, cannot be overlooked, and meeting them necessitates to overcoming the boundaries between the public and the private spheres, and also the large-scale presence in public space and their precarious bodies coming together for domesticity, for privacy, for rest, cannot be completely detached from the political action. But of course, not all spaces in the city are equal, either physically or symbolical, and sometimes their appearance are louder. They are even more visible, like in these places I show you that are in the central district of Hong Kong. Here you have Statue Square, which is located at the heart of the financial area of Hong Kong, in Hong Kong Island, the city center. And nowadays, this is a key meeting point for foreign domestic workers. It changed from an elite male space during the colonial era until 1997 to a working class female space. This is space for leisure, but also for protesting. Protests, rallies, demonstrations, all gathering there. Their Sunday presence is tolerated, but not fully welcome. As Constable remarks, the protests and further large-scale occupation of these women in the public space are tolerated because they are peaceful and they do not really threaten safety, economic interest, or social hierarchies. Somehow, Sunday City experience turns into a game of board of both rewards and tolls. On the one side, this way of dwelling in the public space, of reclaiming the public space, especially in a city which is highly privatized city, and everything is very expensive, and there is no space for the normal people. The materialization of this can be seen as a materialization of a power from below, or even kind of right to the city. But the question is where to find a human-friendly space in a crowded forest of concrete. To do so, cost and benefits are calculated. Often in the newspapers and also in some academic texts about domestic workers in Hong Kong, authors express reprise because these women spend their days in places they consider uncomfortable, noisy, dirty, and polluted. But the things such as bus station car parks, under bridges beside the cars, or tunnels, which are not really very comfortable, let's say. Actually, I can tell you that it's very hard to find a suitable place to stay for 10 or 12 hours in a day, close to basic service like transportation or bathrooms, in which you can be for free or it's cheap to arrive there, with shadows for the heavy sun. For those who have been in Hong Kong, you know that for many months you have like a very heavy sun with heavy like you need to protect yourself, otherwise you get burned. And with shelter for the rain in the rainy season, because basically this is not a picnic, a bourgeois picnic. When you get tired, you go back home. They have no place to go back. So basically, as one of the informants stated, rest day is very tiring. And the reality is that finding comfort and privacy is not easy at all. As I mentioned, this way of dwelling in and reclaiming the private space of a highly privatized city could be seen as the materialization of a power from below. And in fact, headlines often mention that Sundays are a kind of liminal time space when social hierarchies are inverted or at least challenged. But the thing is, the position don't really change. And in fact, the public space, the objectification and commodification of their bodies and lives assumes new forms and reaches new audiences. As you can see on the screen on the right, the humanizing gaze goes even further, reaching new global audiences, such as tourists who take pictures of their bodies and practice like animals in a zoo. And this also includes locals, tourists, bloggers, but also researchers, something to think about it. Quoting one of my informants down here, and well, we are in a public space, so that's one thing. We are in a public space. So anyone can just take a photo and can just post wherever caption they want, or even say they mingled or they talked, when in fact they didn't. The next question is, can really their experience in Hong Kong ever be separated from their bodies? The stereotype of Filipino women is linked to the emergence of sex trade during the US colonial period in the Philippines, plus further development of the so-called tourist industry. As Constable and Chang Grove suggest, in Hong Kong, for Filipino domestic workers' sexualities and bodies are perceived as a danger, as threatening. And also discipline and surveillance are seen as the remedy. The notion of docile bodies, coined by Foucault, describes how power is an integral part of functioning of social institutions, such as schools, hospitals, or prisons, in which bodies become the object and target of power. This power is exercised through everyday practices grounded in surveillance and discipline. And all the system in the Hong Kong, Philippines context, from the government to recruitment agencies and employers, serve to make foreign domestic workers compliant, especially through self-imposed discipline. On the screen, you can see some examples of both surveillance and discipline from the state through the clauses in the contract, for example, the recruitment agencies during the training, telling them they have to cut very short hair, they have to wear this way, they have to talk like this, or something like that. And overall, the self-made disciplines, such as they reflected in the following sentences, for example, in the top. No, I have never been to a bar here. I'm a good girl. You need to be simple. We know already that we are domestic helpers, so we need to act like the domestic helpers. However, beyond this surveillance and discipline, sometimes their bodies slightly relax and context this bodily discipline, particularly in those places like bars or clubs, in the dark or semi-private spaces. However, I thought at an individual levels, surveillance disappear as they are not watched by their employers or their partners. The public scrutiny is omnipresent, and this stereotype of the Filipino woman as a chaser is omnipresent. Yep. However, at some point, no matter what, the music stops and they have to go back home or the place where they live. Every Sunday around 7 p.m., sometimes 6:30, 7:30, depends, the countdown starts. They have a curfew. They name it like this. The employers who set the curfew, and they have to obey. The day off is, in fact, only 10 to 12 hours free. I thought, by contrast, they should have at least 24 hours. But then, until when the 7 p.m. or about comes, then their bodies are back stored at night, because their bodies are especially conflictive at night. So in this hostile context, how to survive, and even more important, how to live? It requires what I have called immaterial generative dwelling, and this refers to a series of organic wakes, domestic worker assemble and disassemble material and immaterial resources, logistics, and infrastructures, whether they are owned, borrowed, or appropriated, to create livable worlds within this difficult context. In a context in which their existence is linked inevitably to marginality and overall to a subaltern position in the public and private continuum. Informal domestic territories clearly delineate the cartographies of vulnerability, but also as an opportunity, the opportunity to be and to appear together, to act together. In this sense, a key infrastructure are the foreign domestic workers themselves. The concept of people as infrastructure was coined by Simone, who explores forms of collective urban life in the Global South, with a focus upon people's activities and economic collaborations between marginalized urban actors. He highlights the ability of heterogeneous residents to engage in different and complex combinations of objects, spaces, persons, and practices, and how these conjunctions become a platform for providing and reproducing city life. Collaboratory practice, Simon suggests, depends on individuals' flexibility and enabling them to occupy different positions and navigating urban spaces by improvisation, regularity, and provisionality. In this article, this approach speaks to the ability of foreign domestic workers to deploy what I have identified as one, multiple circuits of care, second, strategic alliances, and third, negotiated collaborations. I can talk more about this later if you want, but I will just pass briefly through this. The circuits of care include what I have called, for example, convivial care, which emphasizes solidarity and empathy among subaltern actors. And a clear example is that often foreign domestic workers share their food with local beggars. It's very normal that when they are in the street eating, some local people come to ask for food and they often share. But this is interesting because it challenged the binary local people and foreign domestic workers, like inverting the classic hierarchy there, let's say. Strategic alliances include, for example, the rallies and demonstrations coordinated with foreign domestic workers of other nationalities or with LGTB groups, although the latter are more complex. And finally, negotiated collaborations include, for example, with Indian and Pakistani merchants who provide Filipino women with clothes to sell in the street. Street selling, although is prohibited, storage space for a commission fee. So what about when Sunday ends? Often this kind of city is understood as an ephemeral city, but in fact, I do not agree. I think I rather consider it as a mutable city, as it does not disappear. There is a part which unfolds, But these women might turn invisible, but they remain agentic and they remain infrastructural. This social infrastructural city extends to the virtual domain, both locally and transnationally, to Philippines and third countries, and across multiple temporal dimensions, including past, present, and future. And basically, next Sunday, as every Sunday, the intermittent and mutable volume and contourness of the city, which is the most visible layer of the hybrid immaterial assemblage, namely the other city, will be back. And I think it's 40 minutes now, so it's where I say I will speak. If you want, I can recall a little bit on cosmopolitanism or not. As I say, it's not my key my keyword in my work, but yeah. Very shortly, this, as I mentioned, early critical approaches to cosmopolitanism, like Appadurai, Baliba, Baba, Popinelli, or Cerilli, reframes cosmopolitanism as uneven, conceptual, conflictual, and grounded in relations of power. I think this is very visible in here, especially the relations of power, and is offered experience under conditions of coercion rather than a choice itself. Filipino domestic workers are deeply embedded in these transitional circuits of care, migration, aspiration, and affect, yet they remain structurally excluded from the global city, from the legal and symbolic promises of this global city. Their situation reflects a form of cosmopolitanism without membership, which Balibar describes as the disjuncture between universal presence and unequal rights. Through collective presence, care, and creativity, they generate alternative ways of being urban and being global, ways that challenge dominant imaginaries of mobility and belonging. However, I thought these domestic workers are deeply entangled in global process. They navigate multiple registers, transnational networks, and work. Yet this cosmopolitanism, is lived always from the margins under condition of exclusion, surveillance, and dependency, and also very based in the gender, class, race system. I think it's okay. It's all from my side. Thank you.